Well, my earliest memories of Marshall were from probably the year 1964, because I would have been 6 years old then and started attending first grade at Marshall Elementary School. And that building is now, houses the Marshall Community Center. And the single-story brick building where the community center is was the first through the third grade. And then the higher grades were in the old building, which had once been Marshall High School. Unfortunately, that building was destroyed by fire in 1969 and happened during the Christmas vacation, as a matter of fact. And what was spectacular about it is I remember sitting in my sister's bedroom window watching the flames. We live at least 3.5 miles from Marshall, and the flames were way up in the sky. And anyway, that was quite an event in its time. But they were able to save the auditorium and the wing that's there now, that's the community center. So they were really my earliest, I remember a little bit from when I was 4 years old, but really not much about town. They were all family memories. But from 6 years on, I can remember it. So, for instance, I remember the Lone Oak Recreation Association. My father was a founding member of that organization. And of course, the kids, we just called it the Marshall Pool. And he volunteered countless hours to build that facility and then maintain it. And I can remember going up there and shoveling gravel with him and helping him do this and that and repairing the well when it went bad and this kind of thing. And that's what you did back in those days. And people gathered together, pooled their talents, and did things that were good for the community. And certainly that pool was good for the community. Every kid back then, all of my peers learned to swim at the Marshall Pool, and so did I. Another place that I remember that I know a lot of people don't remember this because it's way back. The Marshall Creamery was across from the Southern States on that back street, and I don't recall the name, but I remember going there at a very young age with my mom and my dad. And the place, I can still remember that smell because, anytime you process dairy products, you're going to have that odor that's like sweet and sour all at the same time. So I still remember that smell, and I still remember Mr. Lewis, a small frame man, but big old smile, and he would come out and greet you and handle the transaction. And right across the street from that was the Southern States. Southern States Cooperative. It was owned by Mr. Epps. And the guy that did all the handiwork, all the lifting for him, was a gentle giant of a man named Robert Golden, who lived on the back street. And Robert and his family had lived here for years. And my grandfather, most of the time I would go there with my granddad. He was going to buy seed for the garden or feed for the horses. Or sometimes he would just go and share stories with the old timers that hung out there, because a lot of the old farmers would come in there for something, especially like on a rainy day when they couldn't work, and they just hang around and tell stories and tell lies. But coincidentally, being there one time prompted a story from my granddad, which always fascinated me. It was a story about Robert's dad, Walter Golden. And Walter was an equally large and equally gentle man. But he had been a farmer in his early years, and he and my granddad and other farmers were working in a field together, and they stopped for a break, most likely for lunch. They stopped for a break, and Mr. Golden said, I bet I'm the only man in this field that can lift his horse off the ground. And of course, after lots of chuckles and murmuring, somebody took the wager and said, yeah, okay, I'll bet you. So according to my grandfather, he got underneath the belly of the horse, braced himself, and picked that animal up at least 3 inches off the ground. So needless to say, he won his bet. But that story left a lasting impression on me as a young boy, especially a young boy who wanted to be a farmer. Close to the southern states would have been Marshall Hardware, and that was run by Lou and Norris O'Bannon, and of course everybody in the community knew them. They extended credit to just about anybody and everybody, and they just had everything you could want to repair things around home. My dad would go in there, he went in there all the time because he was constantly working on something, and so he would go to get tools or he would go to get supplies. And the great thing about the hardware, if they didn't have it, they would get it. They would find somebody, you know, all the old hardware stores were like that. If they didn't have it, they'd find some place they could get it for you. And of course, you know, back in the days when we didn't have Lowe's or Home Depot, those stores were critical, vital pieces of the community because, you know, little community couldn't function without a place like that. So I have vivid memories of the hardware store because I was in there so many times. Another business on Main Street that I remember very well was the old Sinclair station. Of course, young people now never heard of Sinclair, but Sinclair was it later became, I think, American Oil, and then that was bought out by British Petroleum, or BP as we know it now. But Sinclair, their emblem, their icon, was a dinosaur that looked very much like Dino on the Flintstones. But the Sinclair station in Marshall was owned by a cousin of ours. His name was Wallace Glascock. And he was a huge, very tall man, not heavy, but very tall man, but he was always smiling. And my dad told me that he had been captured by the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge, and he was locked in a boxcar with a bunch of other American soldiers. And the idea was that the Germans thought that the Americans would bomb that railroad and kill those guys, and they wouldn't have to, you know, they wouldn't have to deal with them as prisoners of war. Well, luckily, that particular boxcar didn't get blown up, and so he survived, made it home. He was in terrible shape when he got home, but the man, no bitterness, just as happy, and always had a smile and kind word for his customers. The other thing that I thought was interesting about the Sinclair station, and maybe nobody else notices this, but I certainly noticed this. Back in those days, so many gas stations were built elevated. They were above the level of the road, and I think it was to draw attention to them, you know, to give them kind of an air of prominence, like when you're driving through and, oh, hey, there's a gas station, I need to stop. And that's the way Sinclair was. It was above the street. And it's the only one I know of in town that was like that. And the place, as I said, was so friendly and open. I remember going in one day and their cash register was sitting open. Nobody around. Cash drawer open. They're in the back working. But you could do that back then because you just trusted people to do the right thing. And most of the time they did. So, the other thing I remember about Wallace's service station is that they had some tools that my dad didn't have, couldn't afford them. And so he would go and borrow those tools from Wallace. Don't ever remember being turned down. Because there again, in small town America, that's what you did. You helped out whenever you could and however you could. And you didn't worry about the payment because you knew that someday you would need help and it would be there for you.